Good morning and welcome to Municipal Council for the District of Lunenburg on March the 25th, I think. Lose track of days. March the 25th. We are in Mi'kma'ki, the traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq people, and we recognize the beautiful land that we live in and that we are treaty people on this land. Are there any announcements, acknowledgements, or recognitions? Councillor Brooks.
I just want to acknowledge my attendance at the meeting last night held across the street. It was really excellent to see community engagement, and it's something that I've been pushing for and hoping for. This is an issue that's clearly motivated a lot of individuals, and there are a lot of feelings, and I think it's important that we approach this as a community to decide what we want. This is an issue of mine about provincial download, and we need to decide as council how we approach these downloads. There were a lot of really thoughtful speakers last night. It was a very friendly and a very polite environment where people were willing to discuss things, and I really applaud the group that got together and raised their collective voices. So that's all I want to say.
Any other acknowledgements? Councillor Smith.
I just want to acknowledge the success of Agriculture Day this weekend. It didn't actually happen in the district, but we were part sponsors of it. It took place in Caledonia at the North Queens Fire Hall and Business Hub. And it was just an excellent day for farmers of all sized farms to come together and hear some really great speakers. I would highlight Amy Hill from Snowy River Farms. She gave an excellent talk on the realities of farming today. It was very much appreciated. And also Jim Abraham gave an excellent talk on extreme weather and climate, adapting to climate change in farming. And I also want to highlight the North Queens Fire Department does an excellent job catering. And they just heaped plates full with wonderful home-cooked food. So just kudos to the Department of Agriculture and Queens, who hosted. The municipality of Chester was also there, and there were some great booths from organizations that support farmers, and yeah, just a really great job.
Any other acknowledgements this morning? I'd like to acknowledge that I was at the Christmas tree, Lunenburg County Christmas tree growers meeting on Saturday, which conflicted with going to Agriculture Day, which I would have enjoyed as well. But it was the meeting was in the 40s, so a good turnout for that. Of course, with Christmas tree growers, there was lots of conversation about the tariff situation with the U.S. and the implications for the industry here. Given that there's a bit of a window between now and when those trees would be harvested and shipped, and the tariff issue keeps floating around and moving, so there was still great uncertainty about what the implications are. But the growers are working together and working with other related groups. A lot of the agriculture groups are working with as well. And also looking for ways that they can perhaps develop some new markets. And they have a bit of a window to do that. So it was interesting to be there and to be part of that discussion. Anything else anyone wants to add? Councillor Vino.
Thank you. It's not a past event, but I wanted to bring attention to an event coming up this weekend, the Jennifer Collins Classic Tournament, formerly called the Burg Classic, is a hockey tournament that aims to raise funds that completely go back to the community, to people that might be facing financial hardship and facing local circumstances where they might need help. Besides just hockey all weekend, there's also a breakfast at the Lunenburg and District Fire Department at 8 a.m. I will be there serving for anybody who would like to come and show their support for the community.
Thank you. Today, there's a Purple Day proclamation, so I will read that. Whereas Purple Day is a global effort dedicated to promoting epilepsy awareness in countries around the world, and whereas epilepsy is one of the most common neurological conditions, estimated to affect over 50 million people worldwide, and 42 people in Canada are diagnosed every day. And whereas 1 in 10 persons will have to have at least one seizure during his or her lifetime. And whereas the public is often unable to recognize common seizure types or how to respond with appropriate first aid. And whereas Purple Day will be celebrated on March 26th annually to increase understanding, reduce stigma, and improve the quality of life for people with epilepsy throughout the country and globally. I therefore do proclaim March 26th, 2025, Purple Day, in an effort to raise awareness of epilepsy in Canada. We do at each meeting have an opportunity for public input, and we will move to that right now. And I'd just like to outline the format that we follow in receiving public input. It is an important way for our residents to have an opportunity to speak before council, and we do this at each of our meetings. We ask that all statements be respectful of other members of the public, staff, and council, and we ask that you provide your name and your civic address. If you have a question or concern that you'd like to have answered, then we ask that you also provide your email address so that we can contact you regarding your comment or question. The chair, that would be me, will respond to questions that can be easily answered, and it's at my discretion to make that determination. If your question or concern cannot be answered, it will then be handled as followed. We will email you with an answer to your question, or if we need to follow up for clarification, we'll do that and then provide you with the information. In the following meeting, where we have business arising from the minutes, the question that was posed in the past will become part of the public record, and there'll be a response to it recorded during that portion of the meeting. In this way, we can provide answers and responses to not only the resident that raises the issue, but it becomes part of the public record of the meeting. And all the residents will have the answer. Statements and questions related to personnel or to operations can be emailed to the Chief Administrative Officer, Tom McEwen, who's sitting on my left. And we allocate 15 minutes to that today. Are there speakers, and we divided the 15 minutes amongst the speakers that wish to present. Are there people that wish to take part in public input today? Mr. Himmelman, anyone else? Okay. At this point, if you'd like to come forward, Andrew, and address council.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Andrew Himmelman, and I live in District 4 and operate a business in District 3. I want to start by thanking the mayor and the councillors who showed up last night at the Best Western. I'm sure the ones that did attend will agree that there was a very large group of concerned residents about the planning bylaw draft, but also the other issues taking place inside a modl. It is your job as council and mayor to be the checks and balance within or for modl. Someone last week decided that it was a great idea to drop this egregious document package without council really seeing it first, from my understanding. So last night, I received over 235 signatures in person, let alone over 1,000 online, for a petition around these planning and land use plan. And as well, we also raised an impromptu $1,285 that will be donated to the local 4-H group. I chose this group because the most important people in our community are our children and youth, And I believe the 4-H group does a good job around our farming industry and keeping our Lunenburg County history alive. It was also a great example of how the community shows up when meetings are held at a reasonable hour for most working class residents to attend. If I would have held the meeting at 10 a.m. or 9 a.m., I know many would have not been able to come out. I think modl should strongly consider changing all council meetings outside of Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., so that residents have an opportunity to attend and speak out on issues big or small. I'd like to see the following motions brought forward. An investigation into the last 4 years of this planning document from its initial fruition to its release. This should also be done by a non-biased party. Investigate modl's membership with ICLEI and Partners for Climate Protection. And as well, another motion to change council meetings to evenings so more residents can attend. If you are interested in copies of this petition or the other one that I have started, which was just last night, and I believe I have almost 50 signatures on that for the exit membership with FCM and PCP, and that is only going to start gaining momentum because of these egregious documents that are being brought forward and these ideas that are not coming from our local community, but they are coming from above. I'd like to see local politics stay local, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Andrew, for your comments. And our clerk will take those, the petitions that you have, and it will become part of our proceedings and our record for the meeting today. I'm sure the 4-H group will appreciate the donation that you will be making. At this point, we will move on with our agenda, and I will say that the comments Mr. Himmelman made regarding the municipal planning strategy document will be dealt with. We're going to deal with that right away. So anybody who's in our gallery that has come to hear the discussion around that, we'll be dealing with that right away. And I should add, we are going to start with a council meeting once a month in the evening, and that will start next month. So that was part of our revision in our strategy to be more accessible to the residents of our community, and we will be hosting a meeting once a month in the evening, starting at April 8th, and it will start at 6 o'clock. At this point, we'll move to an approval of the agenda, and I think we have an agenda addition item. Yep.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm requesting that council add as item 7, so immediately before awarding of tenders, the staff report and recommendation with respect to the municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw. The report has been circulated to council members in advance of the meeting, but was not prepared as part of the agenda package. So we're asking that that item be added and that it be added at the front end of the meeting as opposed to later in the agenda.
Would someone make a motion to approve the agenda? Moved by Councillor Moore and seconded by Councillor Oikel. All those in favor signify by raising their hands. Those opposed, motion is carried unanimously. We do have a series of minutes. We've had a number of meetings, and there's a series of minutes, so we'll review them individually. So the council meeting of February 25th, 2025. Are there any errors, omissions, or corrections that need to be in those minutes? Seeing none, I'll approve those minutes as circulated. The special meeting of March the 6th, 2025. Errors or omissions or corrections? I see no one raising anything. Those minutes are approved as circulated. The public hearing of March 11th and council meeting of March 11th. Are there errors, omissions, or corrections? Seeing none, I'll approve those minutes as circulated. Is there any business arising from the minutes?
There's still 7 minutes.
One set, another set?
Yeah. There's the public hearing of March 11th and the regular council meeting. of March
That's what I just approved.
11th. We did both of them?
Yes,
Sorry.
yeah. Seeing no business arising from the minutes, we'll move to the discussion on the municipal planning strategy and the land use bylaws. I would like to make a few comments to start the discussion, and then we'll move to our CAO. On March, I think it was March 14th or 13th, I saw the municipal planning strategy for the first time. And I spent the evening going through it, and any of you who have looked at it recognize that it's a complex, detailed document. The next morning, Tom and I met, and I had a really serious feeling in the gut of my stomach to say that this document was going to be very difficult. It was problematic for many, would be problematic for many of our residents, and it was problematic for me. And I would say that as the new mayor and as inexperienced new mayor, I proceeded with letting this go. And it became part of the public discussion and the subsequent meetings that have been held around it. I should have gone with my gut, but as I said, inexperience sometimes, I think, was my guide at that point. But as mayor, I could have said to Tom, our CAO, I don't think this is the document we should present to the public. So we've seen what's happened over the last 10 days. So I want to recognize for the councillors that have listened to many of our residents who've been concerned, and to the staff who've also had to endure a lot of criticism for the work that they had done on this, and to our CAO who spent an inordinate amount of time over the last 10 days figuring out how we can proceed with this. So I extend my apologies to all of you for my inexperience. This will be a learning for all of us, and one that we have to start over. So this is what we will begin today, is the process of how we start over as a municipality, looking at this. There are elements of it that were worked on for the last number of years and developed into the coastal protection regulations that are now part of our planning strategy. But there are all the other elements that we have to consider, and the ones that have been raised by our residents around home-based businesses, about livestock holdings, about protection of farmland, and a myriad of other concerns that were raised by people last night at the meeting and by those that have contacted us directly by email or have posted to our social media streams. I know our councillors have worked very hard to respond to that and to take a significant amount of criticism. So I want to state right up front that we are going to start over, and our CAO will outline that in a minute. And we will find ways to engage our community in a way that allows us to be clear about what should be included. We know there are certain elements that must be included, but we will be sure that we have a plan for how we can engage our community in building out that plan that recognizes that we need to find the balance between planning for the growth that we see and preserving the things that we love about living here. So with that, I'll turn it over to our CAO.
Thank you, Mayor. And just as the Mayor's indicated, I also had concerns with the draft as it was presented and as it was reviewed. And I could have done a better job of advising the Mayor, excuse me, on what steps she could have taken to intercede. So it is a new relationship for both of us as Mayor and CAO. But we have been discussing how to move this forward and trying to come up with a plan that would make sense for both council and the public. And we are in the early stages of developing that plan. But I think what we're looking at will start from a basis of the core, the mandated requirements, and then through both council engagement and public engagement, identify and incorporate those discretionary elements of the municipal planning strategy and the land use bylaw that are of interest to members of council and members of the public. So if I could just start with a brief description of the normal process.
There's a question here
sorry.
from Councillor Moore.
Thank you. Just, maybe this was brought up last night, I don't know. What would happen if, as a municipality, we said to the province, no, we're not doing this. We're not doing this. What would be the repercussions?
So the province has the ability to impose planning on us by declaring us an interim planning area, which they do in Halifax on occasion, and they replace the provincial position with the council's position on planning items, so it would be directed from the province. So you'd lose the ability to control it locally.
Okay, thank you.
And I believe that was brought up last night at the meeting.
Also, I believe too that we would lose any pending grants or monies also, I believe, because of that. Would we not? Like grant?
That may be a practical reality, but I don't believe it's provided for. And the MJ specifically provides that if municipalities fail to implement mandatory minimum planning, that the province, the Minister of Municipal Affairs, does have the ability to do the interim planning. There may be other policies or procedures that would impact funding, but as I see it today, I'm not specifically aware of any. So the process that we initially looked at following was the normal process for adopting planning documents. And so in that process, staff prepare planning documents based upon their professional advice, the best practices, jurisdictional scans to see what the neighboring municipalities are doing. Because we're a rural municipality, we look at other rural municipalities and see where they are. Attached in my report is a map that shows comprehensive municipal land use planning in 2018. And in that map, it identifies in green those rural municipalities that have comprehensive municipal planning. In the shaded area, those municipal units that have rural scope plans, there is one unit that's in white. And that white indicates no municipal-wide planning strategy and limited, so local area planning. And so that's our municipality. So at the time of the province introducing the mandatory minimal planning requirements into the MGA, only one municipality in the province had none, and that was our municipality. And so unlike other areas which started from some level of planning, we're basically starting from scratch for about 83% of our municipality. There are areas within the municipality that are planned, and those were initiated by communities. And those community plans still exist, but the vast majority of our municipality isn't. So the planning documents that were prepared by staff do meet the mandatory minimum planning requirements, and they incorporate some discretionary elements of both the municipal planning strategy and the land use bylaw to the extent that you can incorporate those into those documents. So the plan was to send it to PAC, and it was scheduled for PAC this week. PAC would then undertake the public engagement. So the PAC, the Planning Advisory Committee, sends it out to the public for input, and then they receive back, staff prepares a what we heard report. And that comes out of the public engagement. The PAC then deliberates the contents of the planning documents and will eventually make a recommendation to council. At that point, the document, having gone through an engagement session, is received by council, and council starts to deliberate it. So the process is intentionally set up so that council sees the document after it's gone through public engagement and not before. Council then can make changes to the planning documents received by PAC. And council works on the document to get it to the point where it's ready for first reading. And then council passes first reading of the document. After first reading, council directs staff to host public information sessions. The purpose of the public information sessions is to educate the members of the public and prepare them for the public hearing, at which time they can ask questions of council and staff about the document that has passed first reading. When it goes through the public information sessions, it can come back to council, and council can introduce further changes then, or council can wait and introduce changes later. It eventually moves to the point where there's a public hearing. And at the public hearing, council is required to consider, as part of its final deliberation, every comment and statement made by the public, either in written form or oral submission, in their final deliberation. If, after that process, council thinks that the document needs to be changed, if a substantive amendment is changed, it goes back to first reading and goes through that process again. Information sessions for education purposes, public hearing, second reading. If it still needs to be changed again, back to first reading. And it only passes second reading when council has a document that it is confident in and that it votes to pass. So we're going to look at introducing a different type of process. We have seen, and I certainly join the mayor in apologizing for the upset and the angst that were created by the release of the planning documents. The intention was only ever for that document to start the discussion. It wasn't intended as the end result, it was the beginning. And it was always, and still is, intended to go through a robust public engagement session so that we can get a sense of where the public's interest lies in land use planning and where it doesn't. And we certainly saw over the last week or so very clear areas where it is not regarded as being something that's needed or wanted. And so that lesson has been learned. We sent out the document, we saw the response. We have decided, and I have taken this report to council, with a request that council directs planning staff to prepare a second draft of the municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw that is less restrictive and closer in line to the mandatory minimum plan requirements outlined in the MGA. So that's what I'm here today asking council to do, is a full reset. As part of the reset, we will work to find a new path forward. But at the highest level, the vision is to start with the mandatory provisions of the municipal planning strategy, the land use bylaw, and then grow that with a layer of discretionary items that can be applied to the municipal planning strategy or land use bylaw that have the support of council on a consensus basis, and at the same time or after, take the document to the public, inform them what the discretionary elements are, see where their interest lies in adding or removing discretionary items, and then wrap that all into one document, and then eventually make our way to the final process of first and second reading. So the new process hasn't been fully vetted yet, hasn't been fully created, but we do have, we think, a means to move forward, taking into account council's frustration on not having seen the document before it was released, and the public's frustration in seeing a document that was more expansive than it needs to be. So I'm here today asking council to pass a motion directing planning staff to return a revised draft of the municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw that is less restrictive and closer in line to the mandatory minimum plan requirements outlined in the MGA.
Could we have the motion put on the floor first, and then we'll have discussion?
I don't have a question about the motion, I have a question about what he said. Can I ask my question first?
Sure.
Thank you. So, I don't think that we should cancel the meeting on Thursday. I don't think that is the right plan. It's an evening meeting that we gave the public notice that we were going to be discussing this plan. I think that we should still provide that opportunity for people to hear more about the plan so that they can know how we are planning on changing it. As was referred to by Mr. Himmelman, having meetings in the evening means that we can have more participation from people. I'd also like to know if there was a recording made of last night's event, because it seems like Mr. Himmelman went to the trouble of collecting a lot of valuable public input for us, and I would love to see that recording if it exists.
I think we should put the motion on the floor. I mean, I think what Councillor DeLong has raised can be part of that discussion. So I think Councillor Bell is prepared to put the motion on the floor, and then we can have a discussion.
Thank you. To Mayor McLean-Weil and members of council, I move that municipal council direct staff to prepare a second draft of the municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw that is less restrictive and closer in line to the mandatory minimum planning requirements outlined in the Municipal Government Act. I so move.
Do we have a seconder for the motion? Deputy Mayor Vino. The floor is open for discussion, which I saw lots of hands before. Councillor Oikel to start.
Yes, I'd like to suggest an addition to that motion that was just made. I would like to see added in there, in collaboration with council and residents of the municipality of the District of Lunenburg. Rather than it just going back to staff and they're doing it, I'd like to have it actually stated in the motion in collaboration with council and residents of the municipality of the District of Lunenburg.
Are you proposing that as an amendment?
I guess, yeah, as an amendment or an addition, however.
Well, it would be an amendment.
An amendment.
Is there a seconder for the amendment? I don't see a seconder, so it falls. The motion will stand.
To add to what was just said, so at the end, instead of saying outlined in the Municipal Government Act, period, it would then say outlined in the Municipal Government Act in collaboration with council residents of the municipality of the District of Lunenburg.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there discussion on the amendment? Councillor Bell and then Councillor Moore.
Why would you need that amendment to the motion when the procedure was clearly identified that this coming out and the revised copy coming out would be dealt through a planning advisory committee that is already in place?
Councillor Moore.
Well, anything that from here on in that includes the public, I'm for, right up front. But I have no problem either way, whichever the motion is amended or not.
Can I comment on the?
I'm going to add, if there's someone else that wishes to speak, then you can conclude it. Deputy Mayor Vino?
Yeah, just my thought process on this. I'm not sure if we need that because there already is a process in place, and I don't want to, we need to have clear direction on this. We need to have that process outlined so that the public knows what to expect and that we have our say. And if the recommendation is to add that on, like Councillor Moore said, I could go either way, but I think the process would allow that to naturally happen.
If I may, and then we'll conclude this. I think it will be really important that we be very clear what the process is going to be. I don't think personally, I don't think we need it in the motion. I think this gives us direction. But I think our responsibility to the public is to set out a strategy for how we want to present this over the next number of months. And I think that's a discussion for council to have. There are a number of things we can do that will allow the public to be involved at the same time as this is being worked on by staff. So I think we need as a council to conclude that, and I think that can be a separate discussion. But I think this gives direction to us as a council to say that the first document is not the document we want to work from, that we want to start with a new document. And I think that's the beginning step. The process from there forward is one that I think we collectively need to think about. And there may be, and I think there are very prescribed ways we can do it, but I think there are some additional things that we want to add in to make sure we're capturing the concerns of the public as they stand now, because this document's gone out. There was a very public meeting last night. We've heard lots. If we wait a long period of time to respond and go back to the public, I'm concerned about that. I think we need to be able to almost give a planning primer, a planning 101, so people understand why we're doing this, what's involved in it, what the process is, what are the mandatory items in it, and work from there. But that's outside the realm of this motion, but it does reflect the need for clarifying to the public how we deal with this going forward. Councillor Oikel.
The reason that I would like to have that added is because that plan of how we were supposed to be doing it was already in place but was not followed, and that's how the document got out there. And
Excuse me.
The plan.
It was followed, Councillor Oikel.
Well, it wasn't followed in the fact that we did not then go and talk to the public, which is what we were supposed to, which is what is being presented now, that we had, the document was presented. As council, we didn't see it. It was just done by staff. We had no input into it, and residents had no input into it.
It was a
And
draft.
it was, yes, I know it was a draft, but what I'm saying is that it wasn't presented in a way to the public as a draft, even though it has stamped on it as a draft. I'm just saying that we didn't have, as a council person, I did not have input, and the residents did not have input, which is what I thought we were doing to find out what our residents would like to see in their land use planning for their communities. And that's all I'm just saying, that rather than staff doing all the work, that they should be hearing from us as councilors and from residents, which obviously they've heard already, but it would just be nice to have it in a motion, that it is stated in a motion, that that's what we are doing, rather than just saying, oh, well, we're going to do this, rather than having it specifically in a motion that we are going to collaborate with council and we are going to collaborate with our residents. That's all my reasoning behind it was, that's all.
We did follow the process, though. It was referred to PAC. But having said that, I'm going to call for the motion to bring it forward. So we have a motion for an addition, an amendment to the motion, which involves the addition of the words around involving council members and the general public. All those in favor of the amendment?
For clarification, so this motion is just about staff preparing a draft, correct? This is just the amendment.
We're dealing with the
with-
amendment right now.
Okay. So with the amendment, and maybe this is a question through the chair to Councillor Oikel, are you looking at having some kind of collaborative process before the second draft is prepared?
We've already kind of had that with all the public input, right? And so staff kind of knows where the public is at, right? No, the staff does not know where the public is at?
I think that would be, we've heard from some people, and there was a large meeting last night, but how we evaluate all of the input, I think there is a need to actually go into community and have conversations at the community level. And that is part of the process that we have to develop going forward with a new draft. And I think that will be part of what council has to consider, but that's not in this. We'll have a detailed plan going forward that council will approve, and that is not what this is saying. This is just saying, let's take the draft that's out there off the table, send it back to staff, and start the revisions, and then we can figure out what those stages for public engagement will be over the next number of months, and what role council will play and where we will have our say in that work.
Yes, exactly, and that's what I've just added says as well in a motion. That's all,
Okay.
if you don't agree with it, that's fine. If you do, that's fine too, whatever.
Okay. We are voting on the motion, or on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment, raise their hands, please. Counselor, the motion is defeated. Counselor Reinhardt, those against, I should say, those opposed. Counselor Reinhardt, Counselor Bell, Counselor Hubley, Counselor Smith, Counselor Burns, Counselor DeLong, Counselor Brooks, and Counselor Vino. The amendment is defeated. We're on the motion. Is there further discussion on the motion? Counselor Smith.
I believe now would be the time to speak to what's happened, right? There's not going to be another opportunity to do that. And the need to go back and create a second draft. I do want to speak to that because this really impacted me as a counselor. And one of my first questions when I saw that document, and I did send an email, was how am I supposed to be responsible and accountable to my residents with the process, the way that it was set up, going straight to PAC. And seeing that document go out as it was, and not being able to say to someone, I know how many chickens are in people's backyards. I know how many I've kept and the size of my property. This is not going to fly. Not being able to have anywhere to provide that input except for a week or so later, 2 weeks later at the PAC meeting was disastrous. And we fell very far behind this whole process once it got out in the public. And I feel as a counselor, I was not able to represent my residents. And I just want staff to know, leadership to know, we're on the front lines. And we're there because we're in touch with our communities. But that also means they know where we live, they know where we shop, and we're going to see them and we're going to hear from them. And it doesn't matter that we didn't have a hand in creating that document. We're responsible as far as the public is concerned. So I really appreciate the apologies and the responsiveness that we're going to change direction. But I just feel, the need to air that. And with the council's indulgence, I would like to share a few comments from my residents about why the second draft is needed. And I have permission to share their comments.
Given what we're trying to deal with here, I think there will be an opportunity for you to do that, but I'm not sure it relates well to what we're trying to table right now.
Okay.
Okay? Councillor DeLong?
The way that this was rolled out has done real harm, and I'm honestly furious. I've had farmers calling me in tears, telling me they're losing sleep, asking me if I think they should begin plans for culling part of their herd. I think that canceling the Planning Advisory Committee meeting is a mistake because we should be giving residents as much platform to vent their anger as possible at the moment. People are justifiably angry about this. You mentioned a jurisdictional scan to look at other municipalities' planning documents. If that's the case, why did we take some of the least popular parts of what I would imagine is Queen's experience here, because I remember the uproar about their farming clauses in their planning documents. So is that what happened? Did we look at Queen's document? And if that's the case, why didn't we learn from their experience?
Are you asking the question? I don't know if you can address that or not.
Other than with a general statement that it wasn't just Queen's. So there was a jurisdictional scan of rural municipalities in Nova Scotia. And the document that was put together by the planning staff was intended as a draft to start the discussion, and it was never intended to be the final document. As Councillor Smith has pointed out, the inherent, or one of the challenges with the process of taking things to PAC first is council doesn't get input at the beginning. It goes through the planning advisory process, and council sees it after it's gone through engagement at the end for their consideration. So what we're looking at revising and replacing the PAC process with is an opportunity for council to have input at the beginning before it goes to PAC, and then council has input at the end after it comes back from PAC. And the document that we're going to look at preparing as the second draft breaks it down to much closer to the mandatory minimum planning requirements, with the inclusion of things like coastal protection and cluster development regulations, because we've already created those. Then council will be given the opportunity to identify those discretionary items from the municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw that they would like to consider being added, and staff will provide information to council on what each of those discretionary items would look like or would deal with if you added them in. And then when council gets to the point that it's got all the discretionary items that it wants to have, it will go to PAC, and then from PAC out to the public on an engagement schedule and program that council has approved.
There are others. I would really appreciate if councillors could focus their comments around the motion that's on the floor. There will be an opportunity for discussion of some of the other things that are being presented, but let's focus on the motion. Is there other speakers? Okay, you ready for the motion? The motion's on the floor. All those in favor signify by raising their hands. Those opposed, motion is carried unanimously. So the further discussion around our steps forward will come up in a later discussion, likely later today, as to what the plan is to go forward, how we'll engage the public, and what steps we'll take. And we will make that public so that people will know what to expect over the next number of months. So if we could move on the agenda to the awarding of tenders and the awarding of the RFP 2024-01405, Housing Market Data Collection Study. Mr. Shepherd.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. As you would recall, there was an RFP issued to collect additional housing information from the entirety of Lunenburg County with the goal of helping to support affordable housing projects due to a lack of data that we know currently exists. So as you would recall previously when we discussed this, we were aware of more than one project, both in the private sector and non-for-profit sector, that were impacted by either inaccurate or lack of data on particularly the rental housing market locally. So what was brought forward was a recommendation to proceed with an RFP to collect additional data, especially directly from landlords, to better understand the housing market, which would then in turn help support the viability of affordable housing projects going forward. So this did proceed to the RFP. The RFP was issued on January 3rd. It closed on the 13th of February. There were 3 proposals received by the deadline. They were from Turner Drake, Urban Matters, and Best There Is Property Management. The evaluation team included staff from the District of Lunenburg, as well as from the Town of Lunenburg and the District of Chester, because this is being done in collaboration with the other municipalities in the county. The team scored the proposals based on their technical score as well as price score. All of the prices were very, very consistent with the budget of around $50,000. They were all just under that amount, but the team clearly identified the Turner Drake proposal as being the most comprehensive. The team also felt like they showed a depth of experience as well as specifically local experience in doing this work. In particular, the Turner Drake proposal referenced their work on the provincial housing needs assessment. So they do understand that market. They've also done supplementary work just like this in areas in New Brunswick. So they do understand rural communities and rural housing issues. So the committee has recommended that the Turner Drake proposal, that the RFP be awarded to Turner Drake and Partners Limited. They did receive the highest technical score, and therefore the total score was the highest as well. I would mention as well that the third ranked proposal that was received is a local company. So they did receive, there's a provision there that reduces their bid price based on that. So there's a buy local provision in the review process that was applied to that particular proposal. They did not rank nearly as highly in terms of their technical score. It wasn't clear that they had done similar work like this in the past. And so in terms of the committee's evaluation, despite that being a local company to the area, the Turner Drake proposal still provided what we thought was the best technical score and plan to collect the additional data. I will note that the Turner Drake proposal was the only one that actually said they would get on the phone and start calling people, particularly landlords and tenants, to understand the rental market in our area. The other proposals did not actually reference that they were actually going to be reaching out directly. And from our perspective, that's what's required here. They're just not, the data does not exist, so it needs to be collected in a manner such as that. So that's the committee's recommendation. In terms of the next steps that could be, if council decides to award this, there will be likely a committee formed with other municipalities to work with the successful proponent. We've now confirmed all municipalities in the district, or rather in the county, are on board with this. So the cost will be shared amongst all of the municipal units. So the committee would be working hopefully with representatives from some or all of the partner municipalities. And it would likely take several months to undertake the work. But we look forward to working with the proponent if council desires to move forward. Thank you.
Okay, questions? Councillor Burns.
I just need to declare a conflict of interest on this, and I will be stepping away from the table. Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Brooks.
Thank you. Can you just give us some idea of the actionable data sets that we're anticipating getting out of this? And when you say we're sharing the cost, is that 50,000 shared within the municipalities?
Yeah, that's correct. So on the cost piece, it would be just over 25,000 for the district's share of that, and then the rest would be kind of based on population. In terms of the data that we're hoping to obtain through this, one of the key ones will be rental rates. Some of that can be broken out by rental rates overall, as well as rental rates based on building construction. So newer units that are recently entered the market or turned over would obviously have a different kind of price range versus long-time tenants. And so understanding the rental market will paint, I think, a more realistic picture of what exists. So as you can imagine, and as everyone is well aware, anecdotally, rental rates are very, very high in this area, and as are vacancy rates. What the data from CMHC shows is that that's not the case. What the CMHC data says if we even have the data, or else if it's just taking a more kind of generalized approach, would say the vacancy rate here is over 5%, and that rental rates are very low. I think many of us know that's not the case. So when this study would go out and try to collect information to probably show what's actually happening, that rental rates are higher, vacancy rates are lower. What that translates into is when people are doing funding applications to CMHC or provincial entities, the viability of a project is impacted by what the current rental rates are, because what those other government agencies require is that in order to provide something that's affordable, it has to be below average what's currently on the ground. And when what's currently set as the average is already artificially low, 30% below that makes a project just not viable. So it would impact the viability of projects and hopefully close the gap between what affordable or private sector projects have and what the costs of construction and things like that are.
Councillor Smith.
So you said that they were involved with the provincial housing numbers. So those numbers were insufficient, and so we're going to hire them to drill down more locally. I just want to ask, so what was the problem with what the province had asked them to do in the first place?
That's exactly correct. What the province basically dictated, this is what the terms are of this work. This is the level of detail you're going to go into. And that was exactly the problem. They weren't asked to actually dig down and contact people where there wasn't existing data. They had to pull that from those existing sources. So CMHC, Rental Market Survey, Property Valuation Services Corporation. Those are the two main sources of information. And the scope of their work just involved taking each relevant municipality, pulling that existing data and presenting it in something that obviously wasn't accurate. So the advantage to them having done that work is they very much understand where those gaps are already, because they've done that work, but they've also done other projects. The one that comes to mind, which was in the proposal, was Southwest New Brunswick Service Commission hired them to do a secondary kind of survey, very similar to scope in terms of this work, that did really actually improve kind of the statistics locally there. So I think having that experience of knowing where the gaps are, as well as actually having done the work, that in terms of the committee, I think that those things stood out for us.
Other questions? Okay, would someone put the motion on the floor? And it's provided in our motion sheet. Councillor Smith.
To Mayor McLean-Weil and members of council, I move that Municipal Council award the request for proposal 2024-01-405 Lunenburg County Housing Market Data Collection to Turner Drake and Partners Limited for $49,400 plus HST for the completion of the Lunenburg County Housing Market Data Collection Project.
Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Reinhardt. Is there discussion on the motion? All those in favor signify by raising their hands. Motion is carried unanimously. And it should be recorded that Councillor Burns declared a conflict on that. We'll move on to the second awarding of tenders, and I think it's Mr. Feener that's up next.
Excuse me. Good morning, Mayor and Council. The municipality is in the process of amending a water service agreement with the Public Service Commission of Bridgewater to expand the service area and increase the allowable permitted water usage for the Osprey Village area. As part of this process, the Public Service Commission requested that we update past water studies for Exit 12. The Public Service Commission also recognized the importance of incorporating existing and proposed developments within the town and asked that they partner with us. The municipality has taken the lead on the project and agreed to procure the engineering services needed to update the studies. The new study will be a comprehensive review encompassing the entire water system from the treatment plant to the extremities of the distribution system. The final report is to include a planning review considering current and future developments, storage capacity evaluation, including the Osprey Village Water Tower, a water quality evaluation, data collection and modeling, a gap analysis, and cost estimates for both short-term and long-term developments. We issued a request for proposal to 3 qualified consultants from our standing offer list on January the 10th and closed on January the 24th. We received 2 proposals from EXP Services and Design Point Engineering. Both proposals were evaluated by Public Service Commission staff and municipal staff. The technical component of the evaluation considered the design team experience and qualifications, key personnel, management, and approach and methodology for a total available score of 80. The financial component considered the base price with the lowest cost receiving the maximum 20 points. A summary of the evaluations were included in the tables within the report, with Design Point Engineering receiving the highest overall score of 89. The cost of the study is $92,610 and will be shared between the municipality and the Public Service Commission based on the level of effort for each service area. Cost sharing is estimated to be 25% the municipality, which is $23,150, and 75% the Public Service Commission, which is $69,460, including a 10% contingency and net HST. Staff are asking for Council's consideration to award the work to the highest scoring proposal submitted by Design Point Engineering in the amount of $92,610, including a 10% contingency and net HST.
Questions for clarification from council members? Can we have the motion put on the floor then, please? 7.2, Councillor DeLong.
To Mayor McLean-Weil and members of council, I move that Municipal Council award RFP 2024-01-404 Water System Master Plan Study to Design Point Engineering in the amount of $92,610, including a 10% contingency and net HST, with approximately 75% of the cost being funded by Public Service Commission of Bridgewater. I so move.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Councillor Moore seconded. The motion's on the floor. Is there discussion on the motion? All those in favor signify by raising their hands. Motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. We will move along in our agenda to deal with recommendations coming forward from Policy and Strategy Committee on March the 18th. So for those people that may be listening or watching on YouTube, if you want to hear the full discussion on the next 6 items, there will be details that you can follow from that council meeting. And at this point, we will begin with the approval of amendments to Policy 074, Unsightly Premises Cleanup Assistance. And
Just to provide a quick summary for the recording and for committee or council members to refresh your memory, the Dangerous and Unsightly Committee was looking for ways to support residents who were impacted by dangerous and unsightly orders. They had recommended the expansion of the assistance program, both increasing the amount and what that amount could be applied to. The Policy and Strategy Committee reviewed and agreed, and so you have revisions before you today.
thank you. Councillor Moore, would you put the motion on the floor?
To Mayor McLean Wall and members of council, I move that municipal council accept the recommendation of the Policy Strategy Committee and amend Policy 074, Unsightly Premises Cleanup Assistance Policy, as presented, to increase the assistance amount to $1,500 and that the assistance not be limited to equipment or machinery. Thank you.
Is there a seconder? Seconded by Deputy Mayor Vino. Is there discussion on the motion? Councillor Smith.
Yeah, I just wanted to repeat my request from Policy and Strategy that a letter be sent out to people who currently have properties with a complaint, that they be offered information about this program. And also that just a general comment that we think about, I know that there's going to be a review of of the policies around dangerous and unsightly. And I would just urge us to think about how we can improve this program, because it's one that I hear about very, very often on both sides of the story. It creates a lot of conflict in the community and hardship for people. And I would just like us to review how we can do it in the most equitable, community-minded way possible. Thank you.
Other councillors wishing to speak to the motion? All those in favor of accepting the motion as presented, signify by raising their hands. Motion is carried unanimously. Oh, no, sorry. Those opposed? Councillor Burns. Motion is carried unanimously. Or not unanimously, sorry.
The recording needs to know, though.
Yes, the recording is that Councillor Burns voted against the motion, but the motion passed. That should correct it. Moving on to 10.1.2, which is the approval of the Lunenburg County Accessibility Plan. You want to highlight that again, Alex?
Yes, sure. Yep. So the District of Lunenburg is a partner with 4 other units in the county on accessibility plans. We were required by the province to adopt one of these. This is the second edition. So the report to Policy and Strategy includes some of the accomplishments to date and identifies work that is planned for the next 3 years.
We have someone put the motion on the floor. Councillor Hubley.
Thank you. To Mayor McLean Weil and members of council, I move that municipal council accept the recommendation of the Policy and Strategy Committee and approve the Lunenburg County Accessibility Plan 2025 to 2028 as presented. And I so move.
Seconded by Councillor DeLong. Is there discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by raising their hands. Those against? Councillor Brooks, the motion is passed. Motion carried. Could we move on to 10.1.3, which is approval of intermunicipal agreement for Joint Police Advisory Board?
Following a request from the town of Lunenburg, council considered joining a regional police advisory board for municipalities in Lunenburg County that use the services of the RCMP. After discussion, the town of Mahone Bay and the town of Chester declined, but the town of Lunenburg remained interested. So we have a draft intermunicipal agreement that would establish the joint board, and approval from the Minister of Justice has been granted for this approach.
Do I have someone who would move this? Councillor Bell, do we have a seconder for the motion? Oh, jeez. Could you read the motion, Councillor Bell?
Thank you. To Mayor McLean Weil and members of council, I move that municipal council accept the recommendation of the Policy Strategy Committee and authorize the execution of the intermunicipal agreement as presented for a joint police advisory board. I so move.
It's been moved by Councillor Bell and seconded by Councillor Hubley. Is there discussion on the motion? Councillor Smith.
I just wanted to ask for clarification of priority setting at this table. So will the priorities be set together as modl and the town of Lunenburg, or will the two entities be able to set their own priorities?
In terms of policing priorities.
Yeah, like, isn't that part of the police board that they set priorities for things to address?
Yeah, so annually, the RCMP is expected to provide a report on policing and look at what areas they may focus on in the coming year, and that will be done at the joint board. Yep, together. Yes, exactly. Yep. So currently, it happens at the police advisory board, and it stays at that level. So it's a presentation from the RCMP, and then if there's any comments, the board makes them at that time, and it goes no further. Same approach would happen, although the membership would be different.
Other questions? All those in favor of the motion as presented indicate by raising their hands. Motion is carried unanimously. Moving on to 10.1.4, which is the South Shore Ice Storm Association grant approval. Deputy Mayor Vino, would you put the motion on the floor?
Yes, thank you. To Mayor McLean-Weil and members of council, I move that Municipal Council accept the recommendation of the Policy and Strategy Committee and provide a grant to South Shore Ice Storm Association in the amount of $18,000 funded from the 2024-2025 Council-approved contingency fund for the Canadian National Para-Hockey Championship being held at the LCLC from May 14th to 18th, 2025, and I so move.
We have a seconder, seconded by Councillor Bell. Is there discussion on the motion? All those in favor signify by raising their hands. Motion is carried unanimously. We'll move to 10.1.5, which is Hike Nova Scotia Major Event Grant pre-budget approval on this item. Would someone put the motion on the floor? Councillor Oikel.
To Mayor McLean-Weil and members of council, I move that Municipal Council accept the recommendation of the Policy and Strategy Committee and provide pre-budget approval for the Hike Nova Scotia application for funding through the Major Events Grant in the amount of $3,000 for the hiking summit. And I so move.
We have a seconder for the motion, seconded by Councillor Smith. Is there discussion on the motion? All those in favor signify by raising their hands. Motion is carried unanimously. And our last item here under recommendations from Policy and Strategy is the approval of nonprofit organization tax exemptions. And we were provided with a document of those. Would someone put the motion on the floor, please? Councillor Moore.
To Mayor McLean-Weil and members of council, I move that Municipal Council accept the recommendation of the Policy Strategy Committee and approve the list of tax exemptions for non-profit organizations as per Policy 012 tax exemption reduction for a 3-year renewal term as presented. And I so move.
It's been moved. Do we have a seconder for the motion? Seconded by Councillor Reinhardt. Is there discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please raise their hands. Motion is carried unanimously. We will take a 10-minute break. We could resume our meeting. Okay. Resume our meeting, and we are going to move on our agenda to deal with Planning and Development Services and Cluster Development Options Report, and following that with the CAO's response to Cluster Development Options Report. So, Mr. Shepherd?
I need to declare a conflict of interest regarding
Okay.
cluster development.
Thank you. So we do have slides, and for those that may be watching at home, there may be, we're having some technical difficulties with conveying that to, we're having trouble conveying that to the live stream. So just please note that you may not be able to see what we are discussing.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. So Ella's going to give a brief presentation this morning outlining some of the recommended planning staff options. Just a brief overview, and then we'll turn it over to the CAO, who can speak to this as well.
Okay. Good morning, Honorable Mayor and Council. So as a background, we started doing cluster development due to a lack of existing regulations pertaining to that type of development. There were some concerns over safety, environment, and service capacity like water and sewer. First reading was passed on January 28th of 2025. There was public information session on March 3rd and a public hearing on March 11th, which after that, Council directed staff to provide some options to consider. So again, cluster development, 6 units and up. We recommend it will be approved by a development agreement. And again, some non-conforming provisions for condominium registration by December 31 of 2025 with a review every 5 years. I think it's pretty known already what a development agreement pertains. So we provided 5 options for Council to consider. The first option would be to keep the original recommendation of proceeding with second reading. Again, the development agreement pertains adequacy of the street network, site, and emergency access, which are very important, especially with large-scale developments. It's important to know if there is enough water to sustain that a certain development, and also if what type of sewer service is there, if it's municipal or if it's on-site, and if there is enough septic field, if it's on-site, to sustain that type of development, to minimize any environmental impacts. If Council will choose to go with option 1, then they may proceed to a second reading with no changes to the original regulations. Option 2 would be to provide exemptions for William Hebb Road development. There's alternative exemptions options. One is to provide complete exemption. Another one is to provide time-limited exemption until 2027, or exemption until 2026. Or partial project exemptions such as phase 1 and phases 2, etc. It's or listed in the report, or not to provide any exemption and proceed with second reading. There are some concerns with that, as there's lack of policy framework for that development to proceed with. So they do not need to proceed any with, for example, again, what's pertaining in the development agreement, like road access, water, and sewer services, with that type of development. If Council wishes to provide exemptions for William Hebb Road, they should decide which exemption they would want to provide that development, and that means that the stop ends for that first reading that was done on January 28th, and there we should go to a first reading and a new public hearing, because this can be considered a substantive change to the original cluster development regulations. Option 3, similar, but to provide exemptions for Trunk 10 Cookville development. Again, there's the alternative exemptions were provided and listed under the report. So a complete exemption or partial or extended deadline or no exemptions beyond 2025. Again, same story with our concerns. Due to lack of policy framework with those large-scale developments, there wouldn't be necessarily a need for an hydrogeological study to be done, so we do not know if there will be enough water to sustain that type of development for the long run, or will it hinder nearby communities, similar to the other, to option 2. Again, if council wishes to go with to provide exemptions for Trunk 10 Cookville developments, and again, the clock stops for the initial first reading that was done on January 28th, and a new first reading needs to come after staff provides some revisions with a new public hearing, as it is considered to be a substantive change. Option 4 would be to just integrate the cluster regulations into the municipal-wide land use project. This was recommended to council before, and council decided to proceed with first reading at the time that this recommendation was brought forth to council. Similar concerns with that, just because there's no regulations coming into place, but that's an option for council to consider. Option 5 would be to delay regulations until a further date, which council will decide on that date that they would want to provide those exemptions to any developments. It will give developers more time to finalize permits, ensuring legal and non-conforming statuses until those regulations are coming into effect. That will provide any development that are already starting the process to have that exemption. And again, if that's the choice that council will consider to take, then again, we're stopping the clock on the council will stop the clock on initial first reading that was done on January, and staff will have to provide revisions and go back to first reading and a public hearing. And this is just a timeline to see the process that was done thus far, and if you have more questions, we will be happy to answer.
We'll go to the next part of the presentation, and then we'll have questions about the entire presentation when we finish this.
So thank you, Mayor. So as council will recall, during the public hearing, there were two presentations in particular that I'll speak to. And as Ella's outlined in her report, one deals with the development on William Hebb Road, and the other deals with the development on Trunk 10. I'll deal with the William Hebb Road item first. So you can see the timeline that's outlined. We've been dealing with the cluster development land use bylaw since July of 23. So almost heading on 2 full years. Things have been moving forward, particularly since 2024, when in February of 2024, we almost had a first reading, but because the province released its position on the Coastal Protection Coastal Protection Act and regulations, at that point, we were dealing with coastal protection and cluster development at the same time. Both were scheduled for first reading the next day, I think February 27th. Both were paused. And coastal development continued on its own, and cluster development continued on its own. And you can see first reading of this version of cluster development was July 24. The second first reading was January of 25. And then that's the reading that we're still under today because first reading has passed. The issue with the William Hebb Road development is I should have been in a position to bring to council the fact that that development existed, and I was not. And because I was not in a position to bring it forward, council didn't know about it, and therefore council couldn't turn its mind to it. So that was not an error on the part of the developers. That was an error on my part. And because they were not part of the discussion, council never turned its mind to whether there should be a specific non-conforming use provision that only applied to cluster developments that were not phased development condominiums. So we had a lot of discussion about what the non-conforming use provision should be for phased development condominiums, and council landed on December 31st, 2025. The bylaw has no mirroring provision for cluster developments that are not phased development condominiums. And I think it's fair to say that it's more likely than not that had council been made aware of this project, they would have turned their mind to it collectively and created a grandfathering clause at the time of creating the bylaw. I think that by the way council responded to phased development condominiums and accepted and included the non-conforming use provision, I have every reason to believe that council would have done the same thing. It certainly would have been my recommendation at the time to include it. My recommendation at this point is to correct that oversight, if we can call it that, or correct that error, and create a non-conforming provision for cluster developments that are not phased development condominiums. And the date on that, I suggest, should be the same date that's found in the non-conforming clause for phased development condominiums, which is currently December 31st, 2025. That leads me to the second item that was addressed at the public hearing. We had a request from a developer, Matt Oikel, who owns the land just on the other side of the French school, and he explained that he would like to put in place a phased development condominium that would have up to 600 units. He expressed his concern that the current timeline for him to have all of that rolled out, December 31st, 2025, isn't sufficient to do the project justice from his perspective and make it everything that it could be, and to include public engagement and discussions on potential community uses within the development. He's indicated that if the timeline stays, he can still do something. It just won't be as, in his words, good as it could be. And so his request to council was to extend that December 31st, 2025 deadline to December 26 or 27, to allow him the time to develop it out the way that he wants to create a successful, what in his mind would be a more successful development. So council has a number of options available to it. As Ella pointed out in her report, council could choose to do nothing and continue on to second reading with the document as it is. So that's option one. Option two is to make accommodation for the William Hebb Road development, and that's all. Option three is to do the request of Matt Oikel for the trunk 10, but not William Hebb, or four, do both. And I'm recommending we do both. And the reason I'm recommending we do both is, one, I think it's the right thing to do for the William Head Road development. And the other is that there is very little risk if we open this window from December 31st onward to allow any other phased development condominiums to take advantage of the grandfathering clause. Because the language that's presented in the land use bylaws, that corporations have to exist. And for a phased development corporation to exist, our development officer has to sign off on a declaration. And our development officer has confirmed that since she signed off on the declaration for Matt Oikel's condominiums, no other declaration has been presented to us for signature. That means that there should be nothing in the queue. There are no declarations signed by our development officer for other phased development condominiums, which, if existed, could take advantage of the extension. So we're fairly confident that there's nothing out there waiting to come floating in the event that you make this extension from December 31st, 2025 to December 31st, 2026, or December 31st, 2027. We also have heard from members of the public that there is a concern that if you go back to first reading, because any change is recognized as a substantial amendment, how do we minimize creating the gap between the end of the current first reading and the beginning of the next first reading? And we think we have found a way to achieve that. And that is by directing staff to draft an amendment to the cluster regulations to include a section that would permit these changes. But today's motion is for that direction to be given. We would then come back to a future council meeting with the revised draft and substantial amendments, and we would in essence end the first reading and do the end the second first reading and do the third first reading the same day, so that the gap that's created is only minutes and not days or weeks. So I think in that way, we can alleviate the concerns of the residents that expressed that there could be bad actors out there that want to take advantage of any gap that we create between the ending of the first reading and the creation of the second reading. So having said all of that, I have a high level of confidence that we can take into account the accommodation requested by William Hebb Road Development and create that exemption, the grandfathering clause or the non-conforming use. That we can provide Mr. Oikel with the extension if council's of the opinion that it should be done, and that we can do it all in a way that we continue to have a fairly tight cluster development bylaw that's not being unnecessarily expanded or opened up for others that are outside looking in to try to take advantage of the situation. I suspect there's questions.
We're going to take questions for clarification, and then we'll figure out which motion we need to go with. So, Councillor Bell, I think you're first.
Thank you. The option 2 is one that is of concern to me as a correction. And then again, the Matt Oikel shown in option 3 is also a concern. Is a major development. Is there a blend operation or motion of those two, or is the blend 11.2.1, which would be the one that would make the most sense to me, only to me?
So 11.2.1, I believe that's my report and recommendation. Yeah, it's also the one that makes the most sense to me. So the option report that the planning presented were all of the options that we could think of that would allow council to accommodate the two requests that were made. So there's a long list of them. What I have focused in on my report is it's not a complete exemption. It's not an exemption for the PID. It's the creation of a non-conforming provision that would not only apply to William Hebb Road, but any any cluster developer that can operate within it. So there's currently a second one on McCullough Road that would also get the advantage of the non-conforming use provision if it's added for the cluster developments. But that does represent, at least in my mind, the compromise between the extreme complete exemption or no exemption. So we're not recommending exemptions by PID. I'm recommending an inclusion in the bylaw that would create a non-conforming provision for cluster developments like we did for phased development condominiums. So it's a compromise position.
So am I to understand that the motion 11.2.1, which is shown in 3 paragraphs, is actually one entire motion that would accommodate all of the players that we have discussed?
Yes, so what I was trying to do there was to put in motion 1, if you want to create the non-conforming provision for cluster developments. 2 would be the extension that's requested by Matt Oikel for the phased development condominium non-conforming use timeline. And then 3 is to make those dates the same. So if council leaves the December 31st, 2025 date for phased development condominiums, that should be the date for non-phased development. And if council changes that date to whatever it changes it to, the cluster development non-conforming use provision should be the same.
Councillor Smith. Oh. Councillor Vino first, and then Councillor Smith.
Ever since this first came up, it was never to prohibit or eliminate housing or development. It was to provide some oversight to have the right kind of development. I think that both the properties in question do not fall within the same category as the residents on Second Peninsula Head. It's in the right spot, it's the right kind, and it's needed. Tom, you briefly mentioned developments in the queue. Can you speak again to your confidence that there's none in the queue for Baylor and condominiums that will use this to their advantage, which would be the disadvantage to residents? That's my first question.
Thank you for the question through the chair. So the current language in the cluster development land use bylaw in the non-conforming section requires that the condominium structure be created prior to first reading, and then it provides a timeline for the condominium developer to get their infrastructure in place before triggering a development agreement. So we know that the last declaration that our development officer signed for a phased development condominium was for Matt Oikle, and that was prior to first reading. We know that there hasn't been any since first reading. So that leads us to conclude that there are none in the queue that could take advantage of the language as it's written in the cluster development land use bylaw, because to get created, that declaration has to be signed. After first reading, if that declaration was to be presented, Norma would have to, our development officer would have to indicate that there is a bylaw in place that you must conform to. And so the declaration would not be confirming that there's no planning, it would actually confirm there is planning. And that hasn't happened. So we have a high level of confidence that the queue is empty. The phase development condominiums that have been created are created. We know who owns what we believe are the last three that be created. And Matt Oikle's third one is looking at the spot. So I think I have Norma coming.
Sorry. Good morning, Mayor, members of council. Just to clarify, Tom, I just want to very carefully clarify the process. We do receive, or we have received, notification of some Bearland condominium proposals. So we know the application has been received by the Registrar of Condominiums. Those, we have an ongoing list. When those are completed, there is still the declaration that needs to be signed. So that will happen in the future for them to be actually registered at the land registry. And that declaration will reflect, in the past, it said we had no planning regulations, so there was no requirement. Now, going forward, it will reflect the clause in the cluster regulations that says it meets the requirements of whatever number it is that has the deadline of December. Right now it's 25th of 25, or December of 2025. So it confirms that we've known about them, they're in process, and they were non-conforming at the time of the cluster regulations. The declaration still will happen, and we do still have a few that we know about that were considered non-conforming. So I have recently signed one declaration, as Tom mentioned, for Matt Oikle's Sweetland property. There are still, and I'd have to grab the number, a handful that we're aware of that would still fall into that clause that would have that timeline but the declaration clearly says it meets the clause of the new proposed cluster regulations. So we are aware of them, but they will continue, and that declaration comes at the end.
So Norma, could you explain, after second reading, if a declaration was, if a document was received, how would it be completed?
So we've changed the terminology of the declaration, so it actually quotes the clause out of our current cluster regulations. So they have to have been, we've had to have had the Registrar of Condominiums letter dated prior to first reading, to shows that it was existing non-conforming. So it just, the wording is changed. So we can, as we're in first reading right now, we cannot receive any new notifications from register or condominiums to allow people to go forward under that type of, so irregardless if the date changes in the cluster regulations, it will still include the ones we know that are ongoing.
Okay, thank you. It's a complicated process that has been introduced into our municipality, and we're doing our best to try to adjust and accommodate it.
Can I ask one supplementary that leads
Yes,
from
please.
this discussion?
Yeah.
Okay, and because this is a substantial change is why it has to go back to first reading, can you just briefly outline if 11.2.1 goes through today, what the next step will be? Will it be a public hearing advertising second reading, which we don't move forward? I'm specifically asking because you said we'll do it the same day, so there's no gap in there. So just speak to that process for clarification.
Yeah, so this was the subject of lengthy discussion. So what the motion is today is to direct staff to create the amendments, and then we would turn to council at a future date with a second version of the cluster development land use bylaw that incorporates the amendments. And then through a series of motions, we would end the first reading we're currently in, because we're introducing a substantial amendment, and do first reading of the new version of the cluster development land use bylaw that has the substantive amendments in it. So we would end the current one, do first reading of the new one the same day, and then we would have to schedule another public hearing with or without a public information session, and then second reading. So what we've tried to figure out is how to limit and potentially remove the time between ending the current first reading and introducing the new first reading. And we think that they can be done the same day, but it means don't end the current version today because we don't have a revised draft for you to take to first reading. So we give direction to create the second version and bring that to a future council meeting, likely in April, at which time end the current and introduce the new at first reading and then move forward.
And this will all happen within the 150, I think it's 150 days?
We believe the clock restarts at 150 on the new first reading.
Okay, I just want to be sure, not think that that's the
Yeah, so you have
case.
150 days from first reading to complete second reading and the required public hearing.
Okay, thank you.
I realize it is complicated, and so we all need to be clear that we understand what it is. So don't hesitate to ask the questions. It's really important. Councillor Smith.
I wish that I had a better understanding of these developments, because I feel like we're being asked to make a pretty big decision based on some pretty bare details about how big these developments are going to be and the environment, that kind of thing. So my question for the planners through the chair is, what are some of the risks of going ahead without a development agreement? And like, obviously we brought in these regulations to address this gap, and I just wonder if you could be a bit more specific about the risks that you see with either of these developments going through without an agreement.
I think it is unknown, since there's no studies or process that's been done. There are larger scale developments where if their services are on site, like water and sewer, there is a need to know if there is enough water, for example, to know if it can sustain that development, or, and more than that, it will hinder nearby properties. In addition to that, it's mostly, in our rural municipality, there's mostly on-site sewer services, so a septic field. Will the septic field be big enough to sustain that type of development without, for example, or is it a good septic field or the way that it's being done, is it good enough in order for that not to pollute the environment, or worse than that, find its way into the water, into the underground water, so whether it's the well or a small aquifer, because we don't have large aquifers in our municipality, we're a fractured bedrock. So again, those type of things are the processes that, again, it's under the development officer discretion to decide whether a certain development needs to have an hydrogeological study to be done or not. Sorry. Sorry about that. We're getting some phone calls lately. So again, that's why under the development agreement, it's important to have that. Further than just environmental risks, it's important to know if there is enough, if there is like a good access to the site, especially for emergency vehicles like ambulances, police vehicles, fire trucks, etc., to know that they can enter and exit the premises safely in a case where we have a fire, for example. So those type of requests that we have under the development agreement process are those things. But can I tell you if a specific development can hinder or has some risks? We cannot. It's not something that we can do without having a process done. So I can tell you if one of these developments is at risk or not.
Councillor Smith.
Yeah, just as a follow-up, are there any legal ramifications to just continuing with first reading now, or second reading now, and requiring these developments, which to have a development agreement as we have been setting out to do for more than 2 years. We've been attempting to set that standard.
So council has followed the process to get to second reading. So we've had the public hearing. Council has taken into account what it's heard at the public hearing. And we haven't scheduled today for second reading, though. But council could do second reading as long as there are no substantive changes introduced into the bylaw at this point. So the council does have the option to say no changes and proceed to schedule second reading.
But I'm asking, are we leaving the municipality open to any kind of legal measures because of what has taken place in terms of the timeline and people who had applications in? And
Yeah, so that would be a discussion I'd prefer to have in camera, if council was interested in having that. We have identified a development that was existing at some level of concept during the time when we were preparing the cluster development land use bylaw, which was not taken into account in the discussions. So that has been identified as a problem, and we've recommended, or I've recommended, a solution. The phase development condominium request is different. It's a different request. Mr. Oikel has indicated that he can move forward with the non-conforming provision that's there and do his project without a development agreement. It would to use his words, it wouldn't be as good. So there is an option for him to exist because his structure, the phase development condominium, existed before first reading. So the two situations they both are dealing with non-conforming uses, but in very different ways.
I would like the information about the legal implications before I make a decision.
We'll deal with that, give Tom a minute to think about it, but we have other people on the list of speakers. Councillor Burns is next, and then Councillor DeLong.
Thank you. My question in similar vein, just please tell me if I'm wrong, but in carving out these exemptions in the way that we have in the process about essentially restarting, that is to have a non-conforming part that would not leave us open to judicial review of the decision, correct? It provides the best opportunity for us to move forward with a bylaw that will not be challenged based on something being unfair or any of the other parameters that give lawyers shudder when talking about administrative law.
Through the chair, so the recommended solution to deal with the William Hebb Road lot, which is the creation of a new non-conforming provision, would put the developer in the place that they would have been had it been included in the first round, which is likely had their existence of their project been brought to council's attention during the time of deliberation.
Councillor DeLong.
One of the issues that's confusing me here, I think, is we were presented 5 options by planning, and then as a separate item, 11.2.1, we have an option presented by our CAO. Which one are we currently discussing? Are we meant to either or this? And is planning recommending something different than our CAO is recommending?
If I may, yes. Yes, they are. So Ella conveniently has option 3 up here. So what we looked at here were what are all of the possible ways to accommodate these requests? And so we,
is there an option you would like to?
Just 3 is good.
Okay.
So what we looked at was how are all the ways that you can provide or address the requests that came. So the requests for trunk 10, we could do a complete exemption. So tell Mr. Oikel that for that property, you're exempt. We're not going to hold you to the cluster development land use bylaw at all. That's the most extreme accommodation, is to completely remove them from the application. And then we looked at exemptions for his PID with conditions, like extending the deadline, and by deadline, that is the deadline in the non-conforming use provision. So maybe you increase that from 25 to 27, 2-year extension. Or maybe you increase it from 25 to 26, 1-year extension. Or you don't do anything and leave it the way it is, the status quo, which is what's recommended by the planning staff. So I'm recommending an extension of the non-conforming use deadline based upon the rationale that Mr. Oikel put forward and our high level of confidence that it won't open us up to any, to use, I think it was Mr. Krause's words, bad actors. So you have planning saying, don't do an exemption, just maintain the status quo and move forward on that one. And I'm suggesting that we do make a change to that deadline. And then, Elle, if you can go back to option 2, please. And this, so for William Hebb Road, similar type of analysis, complete exemption, time limit exemption 2 years, time limit exemption 1 year. We also added partial projects exemption to allow them to proceed with phase 1, exempt, and then maybe phases 2 and 3 subject to a development agreement, or no exemption. So in this one, this is where I focused on, we have a non-conforming provision for phase development condominiums. We don't have a mirror provision for cluster developments. And my suggestion is if you create the non-conforming provision for cluster developments in the same way you have for phase development, you can solve this problem with a rule that applies to everybody, rather than a particular rule addressed at a particular development.
Councillor Reinhardt.
Thanks. Yeah, this is a really complicated topic, but one thing I heard a lot at the doors was the concern about unregulated growth. Like, people are very accepting that growth has to happen, but there was the sense that there was not enough oversight of the growth happening. So from what I'm hearing, it seems like the cluster development regulations are not to inhibit any kind of development or growth, but just to provide some oversight for, very legitimate concerns, like things like water, sewer, infrastructure strain, environmental degradation. So my concern with allowing exemptions or exceptions is how are we accounting for any of those concerns? And could they be a problem after the development?
Yeah, so if I could take a first run at this. So septic is not regulated by the municipality. So that's regulated by the province. So our ability or our requirement or our need to inspect septic fields is only if we create it, because it exists independently. For phased development condominiums in particular, or large-scale developments, if you have individual wells, we don't regulate those either. But if you have a well that draws past a certain capacity, that's regulated by the province, not by us. We have limited ability to control or influence phased development condominiums because of the structure of the Condominium Act, which exempts those developments from the subdivision provisions in the MGA, which is where most of our authority lies to control. So what we've introduced in the cluster development land use bylaw, and the language is purposefully at high level, like road network, sufficiency of, is because we can't be prescriptive. But it does require them to come to the table and talk to us. And that's not a requirement that exists in the legislation itself. So for a phased development condominium, lots of discussion with the registrar of condominiums. We get a document, often at the end, to sign and send in. And we don't see them again until they come for a building permit, unless there's a requirement for a development permit or a site approval plan. So the intention of the cluster development bylaw was to fill that gap, to require them to come to us and talk at a high level so that council can be satisfied that these 3 or 4 things which we think are really important have been addressed, but it was never intended as a means to stop development. So our goal continues to be to have the rules in place, and the question for council today is, you've been presented with 2 circumstances and asked to consider them in the public hearing, and so you have to consider them, and then you have to decide how you want to resolve them. And the question how you want to resolve them is entirely up to council.
So to your point, Councillor Reinhardt, I think many of us heard those kind of comments, but we're dealing with moving from not having the regulations to bringing in a set of regulations and how you deal with some exceptions along the way as we get from one place to another. I know that's an oversimplification, but at a high level, that's essentially what we are doing. And, you know, we went through the process. We've heard from 2 developers with 2 different sets of circumstances, and that's what we have to deal with now to move it to the new structure that we're working towards. Sure, yes.
With the non-conforming clause time limit, is there a standard that is usually applied? Like is it usually 1 year? Or like, is there a standard or?
So the non-conforming, to explain this fully, I just have to give you a little bit of legal background. So if you are doing something today and it's a structure that you build, and tomorrow we introduce a bylaw that says you can't build that structure there anymore. Well, you built it, assuming you built it legally with a building permit and occupancy permit, and it exists. We then come along and put something on top of it called a zone that doesn't allow it. But you are recognized as a non-conforming use because the municipal government doesn't have the authority to make something illegal retroactively. We can't say in the past that's illegal. Only the federal government can do that. And the clearest example of the federal government doing that is in the FLQ crisis in the War Measures Act, where they said, not only is it illegal today to be a member of the FLQ, it's always been illegal. We can't do that. The Latin term is nunc pro tunc. So the non-conforming provision is a legal recognition that something that existed legally cannot be made illegal. But then there's conditions put on it. So If it burns down, there's conditions on how it can be rebuilt and where and to what extent. And the MGA has provisions for non-conforming use, but it also says that the municipality can relax those provisions to the extent that it wants to, or it can change those provisions. So it was open to council to say, if it's non-conforming, it's always non-conforming, and go ahead and do what you want, but that's not where council landed. Council came up with a middle ground to say, we'll recognize you as non-conforming, and we'll give you a certain amount of time to do what you need to do to make your development complete. And if you do that, we'll recognize you as non-conforming. But if you fail to do that, make your development complete in that timeline, then we will not recognize you as non-conforming and you're subject to the bylaw, which triggers a development agreement. It doesn't mean your development can't go ahead. It just means you have to go through a development agreement process. So that's the middle ground that that council chose after a lot of discussion on how the non-conforming provisions could apply in this circumstance. But it's complicated. I think Reed has comments.
Yeah, just to add to that, we've obviously looked at a lot of plans recently as well. A provision like that is fairly uncommon in my experience. More common would be a list of properties or uses that existed like in their entirety, like it was already established, that would say this, not only is that non-conforming, but it can actually expand and continue into the future. That's more of a common thing of what you'd see, but that's reflecting something that was already built at that time. So it's not as common to have exemptions for things that are yet to be built as part of a bylaw, but that's not to say they don't exist, and it's entirely within the right to do it. It's just not as common.
If I could just add, part of the challenge is if this was a building, it would be easy to wrap your head around. But this is a paper structure that's created in Halifax by lawyers through documents that doesn't exist on the ground until you get a building permit. And so we're trying to accommodate this concept of phased development condominiums inside a cluster development when the other part of that definition deals just with real structures. So you got 6 units in 2 buildings, you're a cluster development. But to get the grandfathering clause, you need the buildings to be built before first reading or have an option to get your building permits in place by a certain time to be considered non-conforming. So conceptually, it's the whole idea behind the phased development condominium it's hard to get your head around, and then trying to put it into this kind of system becomes even a bigger challenge.
Other questions? Councillor Smith requested an in-camera. So we will do that as part of this discussion. And so we need a motion to go in camera. Deputy Mayor
Yeah,
Vino.
before we do that, can I ask one other
Yes, of
question in
course.
case members of the
Yep.
public leave? And I guess I'm thinking out loud here. So under 11.2.1, there's 3 motions there that are recommended by the admin department. The first motion, as I understand it, is to really deal with the fact that our regulations did not address cluster developments. They just address bare land condominiums. There was a gap there. I'm getting a nod. Yeah, so that first motion addresses that. The second motion is pretty clear. It's changing the date to the following year to accommodate the Mr. Oikel's request. The third one is where I'm confused. Can you provide a little more context on the grandfathering clause versus the non-conforming clause in the first one?
Yeah, so they're the same clause. So what I'm trying to say here is if you change the December 31st, 2025 date for phased development, make cluster the same date. So if you leave it at December 31st, 2025, make cluster that date. If you change that date, make cluster the same date so they match. It's not an elegant way of saying it, but that's what I was able to come up with.
Okay, thank you very much. That clarifies for me, and I'm confident with those motions.
Could we, are there other questions before we go in camera, which we'll deal with other items related to this, but more, yeah. Are there questions for clarification? Councillor Moore.
So it was a request through you to Councillor Smith. It was request to go in camera, or was it just a request that, because if we go in camera, the public has to leave, wait, and then come back?
I asked for clarification around our legal standing, and,
Right.
and for me as a counselor,
Yeah.
before I make a decision, that's important to me.
All right, thank you.
So are there questions of clarification before we go to in-camera, which will deal with legal issues? Okay, we need a motion to go in camera. Councillor Smith, you'll move to go in camera, and a seconder from Councillor Moore. So we will move to in camera. We're going to ask the public to leave for now, and we'll try to be as expeditious as possible. And Wendy, our Councillor Oikel, will leave for that discussion as well. Thank you.